The coffee shop had no windows that opened, so by mid-morning the air inside felt like a warm syrup of steamed milk and perfume. Emily Carter wiped the edge of the espresso bar with the practiced flick of someone who had done it 1,000 times, then set a fresh cup under the group head. Outside, Broadway flowed like a river under scaffolding, taxis nudging past delivery trucks, pedestrians dodging the greasy rain that had fallen at dawn and decided to linger in the gutters. To oat milk lattes, Jess called from the register, her voice a quick metronome, and a drip. Large. Got it, Emily said. Tamping the shot, the machine hissed. The cafe had a rhythm she knew by heart, the regular, who always asked for extra hot, the couple arguing softly about a dog, the blogger who took photos of croissants from 12 different angles. She liked the choreography of it, the way her hands moved without her having to think too hard. In this little slice of Midtown, she could be useful, invisible, even. Some mornings that felt like relief. The door chimed and a gust of street air followed a man with a gray knit cap pulled low. He carried a plastic grocery bag that had collapsed into a dam shape. He paused near the pastry case, scanning the muffins with a look that wasn't so much hunger as calculation. Emily glanced over and then away. Unconsciously, she'd learned that looking too long at anyone in New York invited a response. He approached the counter, hesitant. Bathroom, he asked, voice rough like gravel. Jess's smile tightened in that way it did when she was about to cite policy. Restrooms are for paying customers, sir. He nodded as if he had expected that, then added, a cup of water, please. Emily reached for a paper cup. Of course, she said, filling it at the filtered tap. She slid it across the counter. He took it, fingertips seamed with old cuts, and drank in 4 gulps. His shoulders lowered. When he set the cup down, his eyes flicked to the pastry case again. Any leftovers? He asked, almost apologetically. End of day. It's only 10, Jess said, with a laugh that wasn't unkind but wasn't kind either. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. The store had a policy about giving away food in view of other customers. The manager had posted a sign in the back. No comp items unless authorized. She'd been talked to once before for handing off a scone to a delivery guy who looked like he hadn't eaten in a day. We donate to a shelter at night, Emily said, trying to make her voice soft. If you come back closer to closing, we might have something. He nodded again, the knit cap shifting. Okay, he said. Thanks. He picked up the limp grocery bag and retreated toward the door. A woman near the pickup counter, phone poised at chest height. You couldn't give him a muffin, she said to no one in particular, but to everyone. Her camera followed the man to the door. He asked for leftovers. Emily felt heat rise in her neck. We donate at the end of the day, she said, more to the air than to the woman. She pulled her shot, watched a perfect tiger stripe crema bloom. Her hands were steady. She delivered the lattes, the drip, handed a straw to someone who would forget it at the condiment bar anyway. The woman angled her phone toward the pastry case, then toward Emily. It's just food, she said, her voice leveling into that tone people use when they're narrating a lesson. Corporate America would rather throw it out. Emily pressed her tongue to her molars. We donate, she repeated. I can't, she gestured vaguely, the rest of the sentence dying. The woman lifted an eyebrow. Can't what? Show a little humanity. Jess shot Emily a warning glance. The line snaked to the door. The shift supervisor wasn't really a supervisor. Just someone who had been there longer emerged from the back with a case of milk and set it down hard enough to make the bottles clack. Let's keep it moving, he said brightly. By noon, the moment had dissolved into dozens of other small irritations. The machine clogged. A man demanded a refund because his cappuccino had too much foam. A cyclist knocked over the sidewalk sign. The day creaked toward afternoon routines. The man in the knit cap didn't return, and neither did the woman with the recording. Emily's phone buzzed in her apron pocket during her 10-minute break. Her sister had sent a link. Did you see this? 3 seconds later, a text from someone she hadn't spoken to since college. Hey, weird question. Is this you? She clicked. A video filled the screen. framed vertically, comments stacked underneath like layers of sediment. The caption read, "She refused a muffin to a homeless man. Welcome to New York, where we protect pastries more than people." The clip was 30 seconds, cut like a perfect little spear. It showed the man asking for leftovers. It showed Jess's laugh. It cut to Emily saying, "It's only 10, though she hadn't." Her lips moved out of sync with the words, some other sentence spliced over, clever and neat. The woman's voiceover, "Policies are more important than compassion," then an unflattering still of Emily behind the counter, mouth open mid-syllable, eyes half closed. In the span of 16 minutes, the video had 19,000 views. 31 minutes later, it had 49,000. By the end of her shift, a neighbor had shared it to the Facebook group for their building with the comment, "So gross." Emily's stomach dropped in increments. She scrolled the comments until the words blurred. "Fire her. Typical. Performative compassion. You can't even give a man a muffin. New York is dead." Someone had already found her Instagram and posted screenshots of her at a street fair last summer with her friend Sam. Caption Emily Carter. Midtown. It wasn't doxing, not yet, but the slope was there. She put her phone down and picked up a mop. When the floor was as clean as it was going to get, the manager called her to the back. He was a man who folded his shirts along the same crease and whose eyelashes fluttered when he was uncomfortable. "This isn't," he started, then sighed. "The company's been tagged. HR's calling. We have to get in front of it." Emily stared at the metal shelf lined with syrups. "I didn't refuse him food," she said. "We donate." She edited it. "I know," he said, and she believed for half a second that he did. But perception is reality. It's not forever, just a couple of weeks while it dies down. "We'll put you back on the schedule when it blows over." "When it blows over," she repeated, as if the phrase were new. In New York, nothing blew over anymore. It calcified and sat at the top of search results like a stain. She walked home in the early evening, with her hat pulled low, the air smelling of wet cardboard and chestnuts roasting on a cart that had seen better days. The sidewalk pressed against her from all sides, a tide of faces. She thought about the rent due next week, the Metro card that was nearly empty, the coin jar under her sink that might cover groceries if she stretched it. Her apartment in Brooklyn was the kind you learned how to love through stubbornness, a railroad layout with a narrow kitchen that buzzed and a bathroom window that gave out onto a brick wall. When she climbed the stairs, Mrs. Alvarez from 3B was unlocking her door and paused just a fraction too long when she saw Emily, the uncomfortable split second of recognition before a polite smile snapped into place. Inside, the radiator clicked and then exhaled heat as if it were an old man clearing his throat. Emily sat on her futon and opened her laptop. Her inbox had 3 new messages from numbers she didn't know. "Hey, Muffin Girl, hungry for clout." One came with knife emojis. She closed the laptop and sat with her palms pressed to her eyes until stars burst behind her lids. Her mother called from Ohio, where winter meant straight white roads and the smell of wood smoke. "I saw something on Facebook," she began, the way people begin when they wish they hadn't. Are you okay?" "It's not what it looks like," Emily said, and heard how useless that sounded. There was a pause. "Maybe stay offline for a bit," her mother said carefully. "People forget. They always do." Emily wanted to say, "Not here, not anymore." Instead she said, "Yeah," and lied that she was fine, that it would blow over, that the cafe was restructuring schedules and she would pick up shifts next week. She didn't mention the box the manager had handed her with her name written on tape. She didn't mention how light it had felt. After they hung up, night settled like a sheet over the city. Sirens stitched through it, clean bright threads. Her phone buzzed again and again until she turned it face down. The ceiling above her creaked. Someone laughed, a baby cried, a dog barked and then stopped. Life in the building went on in its staggered rhythm, unbothered by the sudden tidal wave that had crashed over her small life. Around midnight, the clip found its way to a local news segment. They used the phrase "under fire." They used her name. By morning, A blog that liked to write about New York moments ran a piece that concluded with an earnest sigh about compassion fatigue. The cafe's official account posted a statement about their commitment to community and the importance of following policy. They did not mention her by name. At noon, she stood in front of her fridge and looked at the shelves like there were answers hidden between the mustard and the jar of pickles. There was half a loaf of bread, 2 eggs, a heel of cheddar. She made toast, burned it, ate it anyway. Her phone had stopped buzzing. The silence was worse. She wanted to go outside and also never leave the apartment again. She wanted a job to walk to, even if it meant being yelled at about foam density. She wanted to put the cup under the spout and hear the machine hiss and pretend that her hands could keep the world small. Instead, she opened her door and stepped into the hall, where someone had taped a flyer for a neighborhood watch meeting over an old poster for a street fair. At the landing, she paused. Through the gray slats of the stairwell window, she could see a corner of the street. A man with a grocery bag sat on the stoop, knit cap low, shoulders wrenched in against a wind that hadn't even started yet. Emily placed her palm on the cool paint of the railing and felt, for a second, as if the whole building were breathing. She went back inside, took the last banana from the counter, and returned to the stairwell. When she opened the front door, December air slid into her mouth like ice. "Hey," she said softly, holding out the banana. The man looked up, eyes cautious and blue as dishwater. Up close, he seemed both older and younger than he had in the cafe. She saw the grocery bag was filled with nothing but emptiness and the sound it made when he shifted his weight. "Thanks," he said, as if it embarrassed him to say it. "It's nothing," she said, but it was not nothing to her. In the tight, humiliating circle the internet had drawn around her, the sky felt very far away. Here, on the stoop, with the city's breath visible in little puffs from both their mouths, a different circle drew itself quietly, a small one, between one person and another. He took the banana and peeled it with careful fingers, as if it might bruise under the wrong touch. Emily lingered for a heartbeat too long and then retreated to the doorway, hand on the knob, the hallway warm against her back, the cold pressing her face. She didn't know yet that this small gesture would be the first hinge on which everything else turned, that in a city that could cancel you in a morning, a single decision could be a seed that found soil. All she knew was that someone was hungry and she had one thing left to give. The email from HR arrived at 9:07 a.m. Subject line, administrative leave. It was for paragraphs that said almost nothing and everything. While we review recent events, you will be placed on leave without pay. We appreciate your cooperation. Please return company property. Attached was a PDF with a form signature and a bullet list about separation of duties, health insurance, and a generic hotline for wellness resources. Emily read it 3 times, because the first didn't feel real. The third time, a sentence she had missed before flashed like a hazard light. The company reserves the right to terminate employment if necessary to protect brand reputation. She placed her apron washed, ironed once upon a time into a grocery bag and set it by the door. Then she opened the website for unemployment and stared at a maze of boxes asking for dates she barely remembered, answers in exactly 8 digits, names of supervisors whose last names she'd never learned. The site timed out twice. On the 3rd attempt, a cheery cartoon of the state smiled at her and assured her someone would be in touch. Her phone pinged. The neighborhood Facebook group had spun a new thread under the video. Someone had posted a photo of a garbage bag torn open on the sidewalk with the caption, "Maybe she feed this." Another comment used her name and then, in parentheses, "Muffin Girl," as if the nickname had been carved into the bark of a tree and would expand with it forever. She put the phone face down again. By early afternoon, the manager texted, softening corporate language with lowercase letters. "Hey, I'm sorry. They're letting people go. We can't hold your spot." He added a sad face that felt like a smaller indignity. Proof of care without the cost of it. She typed back okay, then deleted it, then typed I understand, then deleted that, then typed nothing, and left the thread unread. The building's super slid a notice under her door about rent reminders. Polite but firm. She counted the bills in the coffee tin under the sink and came up with $67 and change, which would cover 2 weeks' groceries if she bought rice and beans and the off-brand pasta she pretended to like. She made a list on a scrap of mail and added bananas to it, out of habit. In the late afternoon, the wind rose. It was the kind that made you lean into corners. She put on two sweaters and her thrift store peacoat and walked to the bodega on the avenue, because the light there always felt like a kind of sanctuary, fluorescent and unwavering. The man behind the counter had watched her grow from an occasional customer to a regular, the way city friendships formed, recognition without names. "You look tired," he said, not unkindly. "Just one of those weeks," she replied, forcing a little smile. She picked up a $6 turkey sandwich and a coffee in a paper cup thin enough to burn her hand. She stood near the lottery tickets and sipped, letting the caffeine knock softly at the walls of her chest. When she stepped back onto the sidewalk, the day had slid into a blue that made everything look bluer. Wine knifed down the block, a shape huddled in the shallow alcove of a shuttered storefront. Knit cap, grocery bag, shoulders in a question mark. The man from the cafe, or just one of 1,000 men who could be him. She hesitated. She thought of the comments that had taught her she was heartless and wondered if she could forgive herself for being careful when the world was watching. No one was watching. The door to the nail salon banged open and closed. A bus roared past. A woman in a puffer jacket dragged a tiny dog that resisted the cold with its entire body. The city had moved on without her in the long, continuous way it knew how. She walked over anyway. "Hi," she said, crouching to bring her face level with his. "Do you want this?" "I didn't open it?" He blinked and then focused, as if pulling her into the light. Up close, his eyes were a complicated color, muddled between gray and green. He looked at the sandwich, then at her. "You sure?" he asked, voice hoarse. "I'm sure." He took it like it cost something to take. "Thank you." She sat on the low ledge beside him, because walking away felt like leaving a sentence unfinished. Steam from the coffee ghosted in the air. They watched a kid on a scooter outrun his mother down the block and circle back, triumphant. "What's your name?" she asked. He chewed, swallowed, wiped his mouth with the back of his glove. "Raymond," he said after a moment. "Most people call me Ray." "I'm Emily." He nodded like the name mattered. "Saw you," he said, after a beat. "In a place like this, everybody sees everything." He lifted his chin toward the bodega, the bus stop, the city itself. She braced herself, on the internet. "On some lady's phone," he said. She was showing another lady. "People love stories where they can be mad. Keeps them warm." Emily let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. That's not what happened." Ray's shoulders rose and fell. A small mountain range under the coat. "Doesn't matter much, does it? Either way I'm cold, and either way you're here." She stared at the coffee lid and thought of every time she'd said policies in the past week. How strange it felt in her mouth, like she was borrowing a word that didn't belong to her. "I'm sorry." "For what?" He glanced at her, the tiniest tilt of humor in the lines around his eyes. "I'm the one who's been in worse places than a stoop in Brooklyn." She looked down at her hands. "I meant the world." He huffed, not unkindly. "Whole lot to apologize for," he said. "Not your load to carry." They sat there for a while, letting the cold settle into their bones like fact. She realized she was hungry only after her body reminded her of the sandwich she had planned to eat. The coffee tasted bitter and then weaker, as if it had given up. "You have somewhere to go?" she asked. He shrugged. "There's a church on Flatbush that opens the basement when it's below freezing. They got cots. Smell like bleach, but at least it's warm. Sometimes I'm too late. Sometimes the line's long. You learn to pick your nights." "Do you ever go to the Midtown shelters?" she said, immediately hating how it sounded. The impulse to fix strangers. "I mean, I've heard. Midtown's got rules inside rules," he said, not offended. "And you're a number in a room with 100 numbers." "I'm not complaining. just telling you how the world is. She could feel his story orbiting around them, the way you can sense a big ship in fog, there even when you can't see it. She wanted to ask how he'd ended up here, what the worst part of a winter night was, what he did with his days. She wanted to tell him that a video could be a trap, that he had walked into hers by accident and then walked out without knowing it. She wanted to ask if he thought that people could forgive a stranger on a screen. Instead she said, "Do you want the coffee?" He looked at her again, puzzling out whether she could spare it. "You need it more than me," he said, with a small smile. "You look like you haven't slept." "I can make more," she said. "I live upstairs." "That your window with the plant?" He nodded toward the building. "Saw someone put a little cactus on the sill last summer. Thought it was funny. A cactus in Brooklyn. That's mine." She felt an odd rush of pride, as if she had achieved something. Ray nodded, satisfied, like this settled something. "Then keep your coffee. It's good you got something alive in there." A car pulled up to the curb across the street and idled, headlights washing the storefront in a cold white. A man in a dark coat in the back seat glanced up from his phone, his gaze snagged by the shape of two people on a stoop. He watched for a breath, then looked away, and the car slid into traffic. Emily didn't notice. Ray didn't either. The city arranged coincidences all day long and let most of them pass as weather. After a while, she stood, her knees snapping. "I should get inside," she said. "Do you if you want. You can knock if the church is full." "I have a blanket." It's not. She stopped. "You couldn't invite a man you didn't know into your life without the math of fear." There were rules that were not policies but instincts. Ray saved her from finishing the sentence. "Go on," he said gently. "I'll be fine. You already did enough." She nodded, feeling like a coward even as relief unfurled through her. She handed him the last $2 in her pocket, not because she believed it would fix anything, but because she had them. "Thank you, Emily," he said, testing her name again as if it might be the kind that stuck. Back in her apartment, the radiator coughed to life with a clang that shook the pipe. She poured out the cold coffee and stood at the sink, hands braced on the cheap laminate, and let the silence come. It did not arrive empty. It carried a kind of ache she recognized as the opposite of the internet's noise, a pain you earned by paying attention. She turned off the light and sat on the floor by the window with the cactus, a small ridiculous soldier against the winter. Across the street, Ray finished the sandwich, folded the plastic wrapper into a neat square, and slid it into his bag as if he had learned to treat certain objects with reverence in a world that treated him with none. Her phone, face down, glowed against the tabletop with a notification she didn't check. Somewhere, another thread began. Someone used her name like a unit of argument. A blogger wrote a new take. A stranger said something cruel for sport and then forgot. The world kept moving around her, brilliant and indifferent. Hours later, when she lay in bed watching the shadow of the fire escape slice the ceiling, she thought of Ray's line, "People love stories where they can be mad," and wondered if there was room in the city for stories where the anger cooled and something else took its place. Hunger, maybe. Or whatever it was that had made her step down to the stoop with the sandwich. She fell asleep without meaning to. In the morning, the email from HR sat like a brick in her inbox, heavier than before. Another email, from someone she didn't know, had the subject line, "Would you be open to coffee?" It was signed with a name she didn't recognize, a title that sounded like a nonprofit, an office address on Madison. She read it twice, then a third time, then closed her laptop and pressed her palms to her eyes again. On the street below, Ray stood, stretched, and walked toward Flatbush, his grocery bag crinkling at his side. The church basement would smell like bleach. The cots would be close. The city would keep its appointments with cold and heat and noise. Somewhere uptown, a man in a dark coat adjusted his schedule to include a detour he hadn't planned, the beginning of a line that would connect three strangers across a grid of avenues and time. But in this moment, in this small corner of the map, all that existed was a stoop that had held to people and a night that had not gotten the best of them. The office on Madison looked like a dozen other offices on Madisonglass. Succulents. A receptionist, with a headset tilted just sobbed the name on the brushed steel plaque by the elevator made Emily pause. Anderson Civic. She recognized it from a billboard in the subway about a winter coat drive and from a profile she'd half-read once about a young philanthropist who said things like scalable compassion without sounding like he was kidding. She had Googled him after the email. Michael Anderson, mid-30s, suits that fit like decisions. The receptionist offered tea and the kind of smile that hinted at good medical insurance. He'll be right with you, she said, and gestured to a seating area where the coffee table held both the Atlantic and a zine stapled by hand. Emily chose the edge of a chair as if it might eject her if she relaxed. She wore her one decent sweater and boots she'd scrubbed with a toothbrush the night before. The email had been short, but specific. I'd like to talk about an opportunity. Nothing about image rehabilitation. Nothing about the video. She braced for both anyway. Emily, a voice said, and she turned. Michael Anderson was less polished up close, or, rather, the polish sat on top of something that looked like actual fatigue, the smudge of not enough sleep under his eyes, a nick at his jawline where a razor had slipped. He wore the same kind of dark coat she'd seen from a car idling across her street. He offered his hand, and when she took it, he didn't pump as if sealing a deal. He just let their hands meet and then separate, as if the greeting was not a performance. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I know you didn't have to. I'm not entirely sure why I did," she admitted. He smiled, acknowledging the line but not pushing past it. "Walk with me," he said, and led her down a hallway where the framed photos were not of ribbon cuttings but of volunteers in aprons behind folding tables. Someone's hands holding someone else's in a clinic hallway. A mural going up under a highway overpass. In a conference room smaller than the waiting area, he waved her toward a chair and set two cups of coffee on the table, not barista level, but hot. The window looked out at a slice of sky the color of a bruise. "I saw you," he said, before she could decide where to put her hands. "On Broadway first, with the video everyone saw. And then, by accident or luck, on your stoop. I was in a car between meetings, and the city did that thing it does where it lines up lives for a second." She felt her spine stiffen. "So this is about PR. It's about work," he said. "The PR would be easier if you said no. Frankly, we're not looking for a poster. We're building something, and I think you might be good at it. That's why I wrote." She didn't drop her guard. "What is it?" "Second Chance," he said. "It's a project we've been piloting uptown meals, hygiene kits, but also ID restoration, job placement, trauma counseling, the unglamorous parts of getting off the street. It's run by people who've done this for years, and by people who've been through it. We need someone to help build a Brooklyn branch, someone who can show up, not just show." "I'm a barista," she said, the word both armor and apology. "And a person who saw a hungry man and gave them a sandwich without telling anyone," he said. "You'd be surprised how rare that is." He let the sentence sit before he added, "You'd start part-time, paid, shadow the team, learn the system, tell us what we're missing." She thought of the HR email, the way her manager had hedged his apology with emojis. "Why me?" She asked again, softer. "Because people can smell performative kindness from a mile away," he said. "And because the city chewed you and you didn't bite back at the wrong people, because you look not over it, but not hard, either. That's not a typical skill set, but it's one I hire for." She stared at the coffee lid. "What if I make things worse?" "For you, for your project. We make our own weather," he said. "The storm's their weather or not, you're in the room. Better to be busy in it." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts without gloss, a budget line highlighted in yellow, a map with dots where services overlapped and where they fell off a cliff, a one-page description of a church basement that had become a full-time day center after the pandemic turned triage into strategy. A photo paper clipped to the corner showed 3 volunteers at a card table registering people for DMV appointments. One of the volunteers looked like the man from her stoop. It wasn't Ray. It was a Ray. Which was to say, a person who might be him. Come see, Michael said. No commitments. I'll drive you to our midtown center. Meet the team. Eat the bad cookies. She surprised herself by saying yes, partly because her apartment felt like a closet lately, partly because saying no cut off a story before it had a chance to prove itself, and partly because she wanted to see if the photo could become a person. As they rode up 11th Avenue in a hybrid that smelled faintly of someone else's cologne, Manhattan unfurled its layers. Warehouses turned into galleries, galleries turned into storage, storage turned into condos scaffolding themselves into the air. Michael drove like someone who had learned to make peace with cabs. He didn't fill the silence with his bio. He asked her questions she could answer. How long had she been in the city? Did she have a favorite bridge? She said the Manhattan, even though everyone said the Brooklyn. He nodded as if this was an important data point. The day center occupied the ground floor of a church that had long ago outgrown sermons. The signage was humble to the point of invisibility, a piece of laminated paper with second chance printed in a font that wanted to be friendly without drawing attention. Inside, the air held a stew of smells: coffee, bleach, winter coats. A woman at a folding table in a Yankees hoodie snapped gum and slid a clipboard across a plastic tablecloth. This is Crystal, Michael said. She runs everything that matters. Crystal gave Emily a once-over that had weighed people for years. You here to help or to cry? She asked. Emily choked on a laugh. I can do one without the other. We'll see, Crystal said. Not unkindly. Wash your hands. We're short on socks. You'll be socks. Emily scrubbed at a sink that had seen 5 decades of potlucks and baptisms. She took a station at a table stacked with donations that had to be sorted by size and then by reality. People donated their shame and their mistakes with their socks. She made piles and then unmade them when she discovered a hole or a heel rubbed to denial. She found a rhythm. A man in a navy jacket asked if they had any with grips because he was afraid of falling in the shelter showers. You and me both, she said, and went digging until she found a pair with a pattern of white dots like small constellations. In the corner, a volunteer read a newspaper aloud to 2 men who leaned in as if the news might be warmer if it was told. A kid in a hoodie colored with markers on a page that said find 5 differences. A social worker with a lanyard explained to a woman how to replace a birth certificate without yelling at anyone. The room should have been sad. Instead, it felt like a factory where people were making dignity out of air and patience. Michael hovered and then disappeared, a good sign. Crystal reappeared and handed Emily a hair tie. You're not useless, she said, which, in the vernacular of places like this, was affection. A man Eleanor's mother would have called handsome stood near the coffee urn as if it had personally wronged him. He had the look of someone who'd been to many offices and had not been believed. Ask her, Crystal said, jerking her chin toward Emily. He turned. Do you know how to get a New York State ID if your last one expired 10 years ago and the DMV website makes you want to jump into the Hudson? I can try, Emily said, and pulled out her phone. She had learned to be good at forms because forms were the hoops you had to jump through when you didn't know anyone who could open a side door. They sat at a corner table with a pen that worked and a patience neither of them trusted. 3 pages in, the man said, Name's Luis. Not that it matters to the state. It matters to us, she said, and the words came out with a certainty that surprised her. By the time Crystal called lunch stew thick enough to make a dent, bread cut on the bias because someone's grandma was still in the room, Emily had touched 100 objects and been looked in the eye by 20 people who had nothing to sell. She ate standing up, a bowl in one hand, and watched a woman cry because someone had found her a pair of boots in the right size. Someone clapped, just once, because it felt, inexplicably, like a victory. Michael found her by the door where people smoked despite the sign. So, he said. So, she said. The word contained too much to unpack. Think about it, he said. No pressure. The pressure, she knew, would come from the outside, the neighborhood group that had decided she was hungry for clout, the strangers who would make a new meme if she breathed wrong, the building super who wanted his rent on the first. But in here, the pressure felt like weight you chose to lift. On the ride back, the sky had brightened the way New York skies sometimes did in late afternoon, a trick that felt earned. They passed the park, where a man in a suit threw a ball for a dog with the zeal of a person negotiating with his own blood pressure. Near her block, Michael slowed. "I don't ask people to save anything," he said. "I ask them to show up. It changes people. It changed me." "How?" she asked, not sure she was allowed the question. "I grew up on the Upper East Side," he said, not sheepish but factual. "My mother believed in doing good the way other mothers believed in piano lessons. I thought that meant writing checks. Then one day a man outside my building asked me for money, and I looked past him like I'd been taught it was rude to stare. It bothered me for a week. I still remember his face more than the faces at my high school graduation." He shrugged. "Turns out you can build a life around the things that bother you, if you're careful." She didn't promise anything. She didn't know if she could. But when she got out of the car, she looked up at her window and thought of the cactus, stubborn and spined, and of Ray's careful folding of a sandwich wrapper. She thought of Crystal's bluntness and Luce's forms and the socks with grips like stars. Her phone buzzed as she climbed the stairs. A text from an unknown number. "You left this." It was a photo of a pair of cheap gloves she dropped near the table of socks. Beneath it, a second message. "We'll keep them warm till you're back." The name attached was Crystal. Emily stood on the landing and let the winter air work on her cheeks. She didn't have a job. Not the kind with time cards and aprons and a register that counted the day. But she had a place to show up the next morning, and people who would notice if she did. Upstairs, she made rice and ate it with salt and butter because it reminded her that comfort could be plain. She opened her laptop and stared at the HR email again, and then moved it to a folder marked archive as if filing it could file the last week. Below it, she typed a reply to Michael's invitation, for words that felt like the beginning of a truce with her own fear. "I'll come tomorrow." On the street below, a man in a dark coat paused at the corner and looked up at the building, as if confirming that a particular window held a small green plant and the person who tended it. Then he turned and walked toward a subway entrance that breathed people into the earth and back out again, the city's own circulatory system. The second morning, Emily arrived early enough to watch the day center wake up. The church basement smelled like last night's mop and this morning's coffee. Someone had propped the exterior door with a cinder block. Inside, metal folding chairs waited in tidy rows that would be untidy by 9. A plastic clock on the wall clicked its seconds like a small insect. Crystal handed her a set of keys attached to a lanyard that said staff in block letters. "Locker in the back," she said. "Put your phone away while you're on the floor. Not because I don't trust you, because nobody here wants a lens pointed at them if they didn't ask for it." "Understood," Emily said, and meant it. She slid her phone into a dented locker and shut the door on it. Orientation took 2 minutes and covered the essentials. First names only unless someone offered more. Ask before you touch. Don't promise what you can't deliver. Assume everyone has a reason for everything they do. And if somebody's yelling, Crystal added, it's usually about the thing that came 5 minutes before you, not you. Or it's about 1998. Either way, you don't have to be the counterweight. Breathe, ask, redirect. At the front, a broad-shouldered man in a neon vest set a line of orange cones to carve a path from door to intake table. "That's Deshaun," Crystal said. "He's not security, but he's security. He sees everything." By 8:30, the room shifted from empty to crowded in the way a city room does suddenly and completely. The coffee urn side, a kid balanced a tray of oatmeal bowls like a tightrope walker. A woman in a coat the color of spring sat down with a noise that was equal parts relief and suspicion. "Good morning, Miss Dolores," Crystal called. "You want your tea strong or stronger?" "Strong," the woman said. "And don't be watering it down with your excuses." Crystal jerked her chin at Emily. "Your tea." Emily built tea like a bartender builds a drink for someone whose order is part ritual, part dare. Miss Dolores accepted the mug and looked up in a way that made it clear she saw more than tea. "You I know," she said. "From that video. Muffin Girl." Heat lit up Emily's face. "That's me," she said, making it sound like the fact didn't belong to her. "I work here now." "We'll see," Miss Dolores said, eyes on her as if testing appeal for ripeness. She took a sip, grimaced, nodded. "Not bad." Crystal slid a stack of name stickers toward Emily. "Write big," she said. "Nothing makes you feel more human than seeing your name in someone else's handwriting." Emily stationed herself at intake next to a case manager whose lanyard read Myra in neat block letters. Clients approached with the wary choreography of people negotiating a system that had failed them before. A man in a Mets hat said, "Just need socks." A woman asked, "Where do I sign up for showers?" A veteran with a faded tattoo said, "Any chance you can help me get a copy of my DD-214? Myra fielded triage with grace that wasn't performative. "Here's the form. Here's what's next. Here's the number I'll call if you don't have phone minutes." Between sign-ins, a younger volunteer with a sleeve of floral tattoos slid close enough to be heard without being obvious. "You're Emily?" "Right," she said. "Tasha." "Yes," Emily said, bracing. Tasha's eyes flicked to the room. "People are gonna have feelings about you," she said, without malice. "Some folks think you're here to rehab your image. Some us think the internet is a curse and a joke. Me. I think anybody who shows up before 9 deserves a chance. But don't take it personal if they test you." "I won't," Emily said, and hoped her voice didn't sound like a promise she couldn't keep. At 10, a donor arrived with a car trunk full of brand new coats. He was the kind of man whose haircut cost more than an electric bill, smiling like the coats were coming out of his own closet. A staffer helped him wheel boxes inside. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. "Can I get a photo?" he asked, already angling for the clean background wall with the banner, not the stack of stained chairs, for our LinkedIn. Crystal said, "Our policy's no photos on the floor," in a tone that made it sound like you could fight the policy, but you wouldn't win. "We could just do one right here by the banner," he pressed. His eyes landed on Emily, in a plain sweater, hair back, hands inked with Sharpie smudges from name tags. Maybe with one of the volunteers. Emily felt the urge to accommodate out of old habit. The place needed coats. But Crystal's earlier words about lenses anchored her. "We can email you a thank you letter," she said, "and a tax receipt." He laughed as if she'd made a joke. "No worries," he said, not hiding the disappointment well. They sorted coats by size on tables that had held casseroles for funerals and science fair projects and bake sales. A woman who had been coming for weeks tried on a navy parka and stood taller, even though the parka didn't change the way the air felt. "Fits like an answer," she said, and the room agreed. Near the door, an argument flared. A man insisted he had been next. Another snapped he'd been skipped. Voices rose, a familiar pattern heading toward a familiar cliff. Deshawn sidled in, not touching, just taking up space. "Gentlemen," he said, with the gravity of someone who'd refereed 1,000 games of something with higher stakes. "We're all getting socks. I promise you, nothing in this room is worth leaving mad." The spell broke. One of the men laughed. "Not even the oatmeal," he said. Deshawn pressed a hand to his heart as if acknowledging a shared truth. At her station, Emily met a pair of eyes under an oversized hood. The kid was maybe 16, maybe 22, the kind of skinny that comes from hunger and speed. The hood shadowed a face made of sharp lines and soft spots. The kid drifted by the snack table the way a fish hovers near a rock, not touching it. When Crystal turned to answer a question, a small hand slid the granola bars into a pocket with a practiced flick. The kid's eyes flicked up and met Emily's. Both froze for a fraction, without becoming statues. Emily reached behind her and grabbed 2 more bars. She walked to the table and taped a handwritten sign. "Take 2. No questions." The kid's eyes softened, just at the corners, like someone finally let out a breath. At noon, Emily carried towels to the shower sign-up. Miss Dolores appeared with her tea mug like a talisman. "They put you on towels," she said, half approval, half trial. "At least you're not just pouring coffee for donors." "I did that yesterday," Emily said, deadpan. Miss Dolores almost smiled. The mug had a chip on the rim and said "World's Best Grandma." Someone had crossed out "World's" and written someone's in black marker. "Write my name," Miss Dolores said suddenly, producing a creased index card from her coat pocket. "If I put it down, someone'll pick it up. If you write it here, it'll stay with me." Emily bent and printed Dolores in thick letters. The pen hiccuped and left a dot of ink that looked like a freckle. Miss Dolores held the card as if she'd been handed something heavier. "You from here?" Miss Dolores asked, almost casually. "Ohio," Emily said. "Been here 6 years." "6 is enough to make you claim it," Dolores said, "even if it don't always claim you." In the afternoon, Emily ferried people between a nurse from a clinic who checked blood pressure with a cuff that hissed like a cat and a volunteer lawyer who wore sneakers with his suit. A man's reading came back so high the nurse swore under her breath and then schooled her face into calm. "We're going to get you seen today," she said. "Not next week, today." Between tasks, Tasha drifted by again. "You held your ground with LinkedIn guy," she said. "Some days, that's half the job." "I wanted the coats," Emily said. "Honest. Everybody wants the coats," Tasha said. "The trick is keeping your dignity on the hanger too." Near closing, a woman marched in with her phone held like a passport. "I'm here to highlight injustice," she announced to the room, which is a sentence that never ends well. "My followers want to see where their donations go." Crystal stepped up, body relaxed, eyes alert. "We don't film clients," she said. "We can talk outside." "I'll blur faces," the woman said, already angling toward a mother and a toddler sharing a bowl. "No," Crystal said. "Sharper now, outside." Emily stood beside Crystal, not to add mass, but to hold the line. The woman's gaze flicked to Emily and grew pleased. "Aha," she said. "I know you. Muffin girl. This is perfect." Emily's stomach flipped, but her voice came out level. "This isn't for content," she said. "If you want a tour, come back Tuesday at 2 for the donor orientation. If you want to help, we need socks. If you want to film, you can do that somewhere else." The woman sputtered, but Deshawn appeared as if conjured and gently, firmly, escorted her to the door. A murmur rippled the room. Miss Dolores lifted her mug in a small toast. "Policy girl with a backbone," she said. When the last person left, the room exhaled. Volunteers stacked chairs and wiped tables while the radio played something from 20 years ago. Emily fished her phone out of her locker and found it hadn't missed her. A text from Michael appeared. "Proud of today's code coup. Also proud of you. See you tomorrow." She typed yes before she could give the fear time to draft a longer reply. In the alley, the dumpster lid thumped as someone tossed a bag. Emily stepped into the brittle sunlight, the air cold enough to make her teeth ache. Ray stood at the corner, knit cap pulled down. He had a new scarf, hand-knit, odd colors. He lifted a hand as if they were neighbors who had lived on the same block for years. "You found the place," he said. "You too," she said, surprised and not. "You know Crystal?" "Everybody knows Crystal," he said. "I sweep sometimes. They let me sit when it's raining." "You want oatmeal tomorrow?" she asked. "It's pretty good." "Seen worse oatmeal," he said. "Seen worse everything." He looked past her into the room. "People keep their promises here more than they don't," he said quietly, and there was something like awe in it. "See you in the morning," she said. On the subway home, the car swayed and shuddered, a beast full of strangers breathing in time. Emily held the pull and let herself feel tired all the way to the bones. The smell of bleach and coffee clung to her sweater like a new kind of perfume. She scrolled without clicking. Someone had posted a clip of the woman with the phone complaining about authoritarian nonprofits. The comments were less bored than they had been a week ago. A few even defended the no photos rule. Most just moved on. At her stop, She climbed into the evening and thought of the small moments that had stitched themselves together. A sign taped to a table, a name written in someone else's hand, a coat that fit like an answer. None of it would trend. None of it would fix the city. But for once, her day wasn't a reaction to a screen. It was a sequence of things done with hands. Upstairs, the cactus on the windowsill tilted toward whatever winter light there was. Her HR email still sat in archive, heavy and irrelevant. She made lentils in a pot that had belonged to a roommate 2 apartments ago and ate standing up, too hungry to perform dinner. Her phone buzzed, a message from Crystal. Good hands today. Don't get cocky. 8 a.m. socks. Another from Tasha. Bring duct tape if you have it. We're always running out. Emily smiled at the mundane urgency of it. She set her alarm for too early and lay down in the blue of her room, the city's pulse humming through the walls. Tomorrow would be more of the same. Tea, towels, forms, feelings. Tomorrow might be worse. It might be better. It would, at least, be real. By the end of her first week, Emily could tell time by the sounds the building made, the rush at 8 when the line formed outside, the soft clatter of mugs at 9, the click of Crystal's pen against a clipboard whenever paperwork became war. She was learning the choreography the way she'd learned the cave's different music, same hunger. On Monday, a handwritten sign appeared on the whiteboard, DMV Day. Underneath it, in Crystal's sharp block letters, bring patience. Emily tied her hair back and reported to a table where a stack of forms waited like an exam no one had studied for. Crystal said, setting down a bin of manila folders. Without one, you can't work, can't sign a lease, can't open a bank account. The state would like you to disappear. We are hard to get rid of. Louis sat, jacket zipped to his chin. I found a pay stub from 2011, he said, producing it like a relic. It has my name right. Only thing I got with a date and an address. Good, Emily said, turning it over like a jewel thief assessing the cut. We'll add a shelter letter and a notarized affidavit and a prayer. They built a file. She learned what counted and what didn't, the way documentation privilege works. Exactly the right bills in exactly the right months with exactly the right spellings. When the stack reached a satisfying thickness, she walked with Luis and 5 others to the DMV, a procession of small hopes in cheap coats. The midtown office had the air of an aquarium, fluorescent light, a hum of contained impatience. Emily took a number for each person and distributed them like talismans. She sat with Luis at counter 6, where a clerk with a bun so tight it lifted her face glanced at the paperwork and said, "This says Luis." "It's a typo," Luis said. Not for the first time in his life. "System won't accept it," the clerk said. Not for the first time in hers. Emily leaned in politely. "The notarized affidavit attests to identity," she said, reading from the policy on her phone like a priest reading scripture. "The shelter letter serves as proof of address." The clerk hesitated, weighing energy against rules. She sighed, "The universal punctuation of municipal workers," and scanned the affidavit. "Fine," she said. "If the computer crashes, I'm blaming you." Luis exhaled so quietly she almost didn't hear it. When the camera flashed and he stepped aside with a square of paper that said temporary identification, something in his shoulders changed shape. On the way out, he held the paper like a ticket to a show he doubted existed. Back at the center, Crystal raised an eyebrow at the paper as if it were a fish Emily had somehow coaxed into the boat. "Not bad," she said. "Don't get cocky." By Wednesday, the whiteboard announced, "Job Fair Friday." Tasha drew a crook star beside it. "We're calling it resumes and sandwiches," she said. "People come for the turkey, stay for the bullet points." Emily spent the afternoon at the computer station formatting experience into a language that hiring managers could hear. Ray perched on a chair nearby, sweeping when sweeping was needed and holding a door when someone's hands were full. "You ever think about work that isn't moving along until you're told to move?" Emily asked him. Ray smiled at the floor. "I think about a lot of things," he said. "I think about the last time I slept on a bed that didn't remember other people's shapes. I think about not being a liability in a room. He looked up. Eyes steady. I can be on time. Then put that, Emily said. Typing. Consistently punctual. People underestimate showing up. He considered. Then added, and I can make a broom sing. She added facilities, support, and didn't mention the poetry. That afternoon, a kid in an oversized hoodie drifted near the intake desk the way a storm cloud drifts slowly, with intent. The hood stayed up long enough that Emily couldn't tell if the kid was 16 or 22, boy or girl, or neither of the above. Crystal called without looking, "You can keep the hood up here." Sam, "We're not the school." The kid pushed the hood back, revealing a careful face and hair that had been cut with bad scissors and an urgent need. Eyes like coin slots, swallowing everything. "I'm just here for a shower," Sam said, daring someone to tell them no. "Sign here," Emily said, sliding the clipboard. "You want to put a lock on your bag. We have to left that aren't on their last legs." Sam took the lock, hesitated. "It's going to be gone when I come out," they said, not whining but stating a fact. "Not if I write your name on it," Emily said, uncapping a marker. "What's your name?" "Sam," they said, then added, as if it mattered, with an A. She wrote Sam with an on the lock, and then on a small strip of tape she wrapped around the handle of the bag. Sam watched her hands move with suspicion that softened by millimeters. When Sam emerged from the shower half an hour later, hair damp and skin pinked from hot water, the bag was where Emily said it would be. Sam didn't smile, but the room around their mouth loosened its grip. On Thursday, Michael dropped by, sleeves rolled, tie gone, like someone whose day had spilled over into night and kept going. He watched the room work itself with a look that wasn't proprietary, though much as grateful. "How's your weather?" he asked Emily, which made more sense to her than "how are you?" "Patchy sun," she said. "Chance of bureaucratic flurries." He laughed, then gestured toward a stack of trifold brochures a volunteer had printed badly. "We're piloting an art night," he said. "Fridays, after the job fair. We'll pay a small stipend to a teaching artist who uses supplies creatively, because we never have enough of anything. We have Tasha and duct tape." Emily said, "We don't need anything else." Michael's mouth tilted. "Would you help run it?" He asked. "Not teach organize. You have a way of making people forget the room is full." She felt that familiar rush of being seen and the equal and opposite fear of being seen. "I can try," she said. Friday arrived like a tide. The job fair took up half the room, a table for resumes, a table for interview shirts, a table where a volunteer coached people on describing a 2-year gap without describing a nervous breakdown. A small construction company had sent a foreman who wore his hat backward and looked at people's hands the way other people looked at faces. "You can start Monday if you can start Monday," he said, and 2 men nodded like that was a spell someone had finally chosen to cast on them. Sam hovered near the art corner. That wasn't a corner yet, just a table scrubbed clean with a roll of butcher paper and a bin of markers. "You can draw," Tasha said, "or you can pretend to draw and watch other people draw and judge us privately." Sam's mouth twitched. "What if I can't draw?" "Then you can draw," Tasha said. "That's how it works." Emily set down a jar of water, so murky it was already a color. "The rule is no masterpieces," she said. "Only maps. You make a map of something you remember. A street, a hand, a sound." Sam picked up a marker. "What color is a sound?" they asked, but their hand had already found the black. By the time the room emptied, the butcher paper held a mess that looked like a plan. Lines and circles, a skyline, a mouth, a rectangle that might have been a door. Sam had drawn a cat with its back arched and a woman's shoe next to a curb. They looked at it like it belonged to a stranger whose story they suspected they knew. At the end of the afternoon, Crystal flipped the sign on the door to closed and then flipped it back to open, because the room never really closed and the neighborhood never really opened. She gathered the volunteers in a circle that wasn't quite a circle. "Wins?" she asked. "Luis got his temp ID," Emily said. "Ray got an interview with buildings," Tasha said. waggling her brows. He's going to make those brooms sing legit. Sam didn't steal anything, Deshawn said, straight-faced. The room snorted, and Sam, leaning against a pillar, lifted their chin the tiniest defiant degree. Crystal nodded, putting a check mark on an invisible list. We'll take it, she said. Losses. Donor guy complained on Instagram that we wouldn't let him film, Tasha said. Called us gatekeepers. We are gatekeepers, Crystal said. We keep doors and we keep people from falling through them. She looked around the room. Good work. After cleanup, Emily sat on the stoop with Ray and two others. Staff and guests blurred in the dusk into something like neighbors. Sam hung back inside, pretending not to want to be outside. The winter light did its trick again, making even potholes look cinematic. You're still here, Ray said. Not a question. Apparently, Emily said, they haven't found me out yet. Found you out as what? He asked. As a person who is making it up as she goes, she said. Ray shrugged. That's everybody, he said. Only difference is whether you admit it. Michael stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching the door as if waiting for it to decide who it would let through. There's a community board meeting Tuesday, he said to Emily when she came down. About converting an old warehouse into a night shelter. They'll be mad. I'd like you to come. Why me? Because you listen when you're being yelled at, he said. And because Dolores will be there, and she only yells at people she thinks might listen. I don't think I'm your best messenger, she said, automatically thinking of search results and nicknames in parentheses. He tilted his head. I think you're exactly the kind we need. Not perfect, persistent. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, I'll ask Crystal, which was the same thing she'd learned to say before moving forward. Inside, under the bad ceiling tiles, the art table still held the board Sam had drawn on. Emily found them lingering at the edge, a marker uncapped in their hand. You can take that, Emily said. If you want, we have tape. Sam looked at the paper as if it might say something back. I don't have a wall, they said. We can keep it, Emily said. Put it up here. Remind you that you made something. Sam hesitated, then nodded as if making a decision bigger than paper. They slid the marker back into the bin. I'm thinking about the GED, they said abruptly, as if the sentence had rattled around in their chest until it found a way out. I can help, Emily said, too quickly. She slowed down. I can sit with you. We can fail practice tests with dignity. Sam gave a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough. Okay, they said, but I get to make fun of you when you get stuff wrong. Deal, Emily said. On her way home, her phone vibrated. A notification from a channel she didn't follow slid across the screen. Muffin Girls rebrand. We went undercover at Second Chance. She didn't click it. She watched a woman on the platform teach a toddler to clap on the 2 and the 4. The train arrived, and the wind lifted the hair at her temples. When she got to her apartment, the cactus had a new pale bud at its tip. Ridiculous and brave in winter. She stood at the window and watched her block wash itself in the kind of neon that made even bad decisions look expensive. Somewhere out there, a video was making her into a symbol again. Somewhere in here, a kid had said GED like it was a password to a door they might want to open. The day had contained both, and she was learning which one to feed. Her phone buzzed once more. Crystal. Board meeting to 7 p.m. Wear shoes you can argue in. And bring Sam's map. People forget what a city is for until you remind them. The community board meeting was held in a public school cafeteria that looked like every public school cafeteria. Beige cinder block. Poster about recycling taped over a crack. A smell somewhere between floor cleaner and pizza that had died nobly years ago. A line of metal chairs faced a table where a handful of board members in name tags shuffled papers and tried to look neutral. The agenda said CB5 Land Use Committee. Item 3. Discussion. Proposed conversion of 118 Kent Avenue to overnight shelter. By the time Michael found a seat, the room was full of neighbors whose zip codes intersected but whose maps didn't. A real estate agent with perfect hair. A dad with a stroller he used like a battering ram. An older woman with a cane and a tote bag that said books save lives. Crystal nodded toward a row near the front. Dolores got here an hour early, she murmured. She fights like she was born doing it. Michael leaned over to Emily. If you don't want to speak, don't, he said. We're here to listen. That's the job. Emily clutched Sam's paper map rolled into a tube, the tape at one corner already lifting. She could feel her pulse in it. She had put on shoes you could argue in, as instructed. They still felt like they belonged to someone braver. The chair banged a gavel and launched into procedure, which was quickly swallowed by the room. A man in a Patagonia vest stood first. I pay taxes, he began, and a section of the audience murmured approval. We moved here for our kids. You're telling me you're going to bring in, he fumbled for a word that wasn't an insult and failed. That element. A woman with a baby strapped to her chest took the mic next. I walk past 118 every day. It's a warehouse. It's dark. You expect us to feel safe. A board member tried to summarize. We have data. No one cares about your data, the dad with the stroller yelled, and the room applauded because it felt good to take a brick to something. Dolores raised her hand. The chair hesitated, then nodded, because she had learned to make nodding the answer expected. She stood and faced the room like a teacher who had finally been given back the chalk. I was born 2 blocks from here, she said, her voice carrying without a mic because it had been forged under louder ceilings. I raised my boys here. I watched this neighborhood change and pretend it was always the way it is now. A shelter doesn't make crime. It makes beds. You want to talk safety. She pointed her cane. You're safer when the man sleeping under your stoop is inside on a cot with a caseworker and a door that locks. Someone clapped hard enough to sting their palms. Someone else booed. The room, which was really many rooms stacked on top of each other, split and split again. Michael stood when there was a gap he could slide into and introduced himself without the "this" in his title. We run day programs, he said. We keep people from falling through. We'd like to do it at night too. He said numbers the board would like. He said stories the board would not. When he sat, the chair scanned the crowd. Anyone else wishing to speak? Emily felt Crystal's elbow once, light and not a shove. She stood because not standing would have stained her in a way she'd feel for a week. My name is Emily, she said. I work at a day center on 11th. Some of you know me by a name I didn't choose. A murmur like a weather report rolled over the room. Muffin girl. She let it pass. I'm not here to argue economics, she said. I'm here because I spend my mornings writing names on name tags and my afternoons finding socks with grips so people don't fall in showers. I'm here because I watched a man's blood pressure spike to a number I didn't know a body could hold and a nurse say, "We're going today." I'm here because a kid left their bag outside a shower and it was still there when they came out, for the first time in months. The shelter we're asking for, a place where those kinds of sentences can happen at night. She unrolled Sam's map on the edge of the board's table, the paper wrinkling like it had a pulse. A city, a place you can make a map of and still get lost, she said. A shelter is a place that says, start here. It should have been quiet. It almost was. Then the room lit up, not with applause, but with screen glow. Phones buzzed. Heads dipped. A man in the third row said "oh wow" too loud. Michael's phone vibrated in his pocket. Crystal's did "Nuthers" was off on purpose. The title on Emily's screen, when she let herself look, was a neat knife. Muffin Girl's rebrand, the grift of second chance. The video opened with the clip everyone knew and then cut to an undercover visit, quick shots of the day center's door. A blurred face sobbing next to a drawer of toiletries as a voiceover intoned, exploiting trauma for grants. A grainy frame of Emily in profile writing a name tag while a caption read staged compassion. The no photos policy was framed as secrecy. A pause frame of the donor with the coats complaining about gatekeeping. A pixelated silhouette claimed to be a former volunteer blowing the whistle on mismanaged funds. There were charts with ominous red arrows, a tone that made complexity into conspiracy, and a closing line that landed like a threat. Follow for part 2. In the cafeteria, the video moved through the room faster than explanation. A board member cleared her throat. Given the new information, she said, we recommend tabling this agenda item until our next meeting. Exactly, the man in the vest said, looking vindicated in a way that made his jaw look younger. The gavel came down, motion passed, meeting adjourned. Outside, though it was only 8, the sky had taken on the kind of black that put a lid on things. Reporters had not come for the meeting, but a blogger did, sticking a phone into Crystal's face until Deshaun moved between them like an island. Back at the center the next morning, a staff meeting felt less like a meeting and more like triage. Michael relayed what he knew with his hands flat on the table. To corporate donors are pausing gifts, he said. 3 volunteers emailed to say they need to reassess alignment. Our landlord forwarded a note from a neighbor complaining about increased foot traffic. He looked tired in the way that meant he'd been writing and deleting emails since midnight. We'll release a statement. We'll invite independent audits. We'll do everything we can do above water, and then we'll do our jobs. Crystal took over with checklists that were also spales. Coffee, intake, socks, showers, nurse at 10, lawyers at 1, she said. Nobody answers questions from anyone pointing a phone unless you see my head nod. If anyone walks in here with a camera and a crusade, you walk them right back out with Deshaun. People eat, people bathe, people breathe. That's our PR. The phones ring all day with numbers that didn't leave messages. A man walked in and declared himself a citizen journalist and started live streaming before anyone could stop him. Transparency, he shouted, sweeping his camera across faces that did not want to be kept. What are you hiding? Deshaun escorted him out with the patience of a tree. I'll call the cops, the man said outside, as if the room had broken the law by building one. By noon, an anonymous account had posted the center's address and a list of questions donors should ask. By 2, the Google reviews for the church had tanked. This place wouldn't let me see where they keep the money. 1 read. Beware. Emily made tea for Miss Dolores with hands that shook just enough to clink the spoon. Dolores drank and then set the mug down with a small thud. People like being mad, she said. It makes them feel bigger than their own lives. Ray says it keeps them warm, Emily said, half a smile. Ray's not wrong, Dolores said. But anger's a cheap coat. Doesn't last the winter? Mid-afternoon, Sam didn't show. Emily texted Crystal, who texted someone who sometimes knew where Sam slept. No answer. Emily pretended to be useful with a box of shampoo bottles while a thought gnawed on the edge of her focus. At 4:30, Sam slipped in like a shadow, hood up, eyes hard. You saw it, Emily said. Not a question. I don't want my face on somebody's gotcha, Sam said, as if their jaw could get in a fistfight all by itself. It won't be, Emily said. We'll walk you to the shower and back. We'll write Sam within a bigger on everything. Sam stared at the floor. The video, they broke off, a word jammed behind their teeth. Lies travel faster, Emily said. We're slower. But we get there. She didn't know if she believed it. She said it anyway. It felt like saying the name of a bus you hoped would come. In the corner, the nurse snapped off a glove. Somebody call 911, she said calmly. An older man at a table slumped forward. His friends panicked in a way that had kept them alive. Loud. Movement. Hands. Emily moved without thinking. Clear the table. Steady the chair. Lower him to the floor. The room rearranged itself into care. The EMTs arrived quick and bored and wonderful. The man blinked, came back to the room, looked surprised to find it had waited for him. After it was over, Crystal wrote something on a sticky note and stuck it on the white board. Wins. James stayed. Loss. Internet. She drew a frowny face on loss. Someone added a crooked crown to wins. At closing, Michael stood in the doorway with a piece of paper in his hand. It was a draft of something he wasn't sure he should ask. We lost 40% of our pledged operating funds for Q1, he said. We need to make it up or cut hours. There's a community space in Bushwick that offered to host a small fundraiser next week. No galas, no step and repeat. 25 people. Maybe. Soup and stories. I need someone to tell the truth into a microphone for 5 minutes. He looked at Emily without theatrics. Why me? She asked, even though she knew. Because the lie has your name, he said. The truth should too. The idea made her stomach lurch like an elevator. I'm not a speaker. You are a person, he said. People believe in those more than speakers. She stared at the draft flyer. Second chance. A night of soup. She wanted to say no, so her life could stay small enough to hold. She wanted to say yes, because the room where she had spent the week needed receipts and rents and nurses and socks. I'll try, she said at last. No promises I won't pass out. Crystal will catch you, Michael said. I'll let you hit the floor, Crystal said from her desk without looking up. It's funny. That night, her mother called, voice a tight thread. I saw a video, she said, heavy with the weight of wanting to believe your child over the world. I also saw another one. Of you at that center. You looked tired. You looked. She searched for a word and found one that made Emily almost drop the phone. Necessary. After they hung up, the quiet in the apartment wasn't empty. It made room for a legal pad and a pen. Emily wrote bullet points, names, socks, T, DMV, Sam's map, Ray's line about coats, Dolores's cane. She stared at the list until the words blurred and then crossed out the bullets and wrote at the top, tell the truth. Don't defend. Describe. In the morning, the day center would smell like coffee again, and the phones would ring with numbers no one claimed, and someone would need a lock with their name on it. Somewhere on a screen, a stranger would sell outrage for ad revenue. In a week, she'd stand in a room with bad acoustics and try to turn her hands into sentences. Between now and then, she would show up. Ray sat on the stoop under her window in a scarf that clashed with itself and looked like it had been knit by 5 different people. When she came in, he tipped an imaginary hat. Heard the board punted, he said. They did, she said. And a video did what videos do? He nodded like the way weather works. Storms come, he said. You put buckets under what you can't fix and you mop. She laughed, and it wasn't the kind that needed permission. See you tomorrow, she said. See you, he said. Bring the good oatmeal. The stuff with the brown sugar that clumps. I'll steal some, she said. And when he raised an eyebrow, she amended, I'll allocate. He grinned. Look at you, he said, learning the language. The community space in Bushwick had been a yoga studio in a former life and still smelled faintly of eucalyptus when crowded. Someone had strung cafe lights along the rafters to make the ceiling feel closer. A folding table near the door held paper name tags and Sharpies. Another held soup 3 kinds, because Crystal insisted abundance matters. Tomato basil from a deli that owed Michael a favor. Chicken noodle made in a church kitchen. Lentil that Tasha swore she could live on. A handwritten sign on the wall read second chance. A night of soup. Below it, someone had taped up Sam's map on butcher paper, its lines and circles holding the room like a quiet anchor. By 6:30, 20 people had become 40. The room wasn't fancy enough to intimidate anyone, but tidy enough to calm. On a low shelf near the door, donation envelopes sat in a neat row like small opportunities. Emily arrived early with a tote bag full of plastic cups and a legal pad she'd chewed at until the top page grew soft. She wore the shoes Crystal had approved. Michael stood near the entrance and shook hands the way someone does who has learned to see people before he sees their checks. Crystal held a clipboard and counted chairs out loud. Deshawn leaned against the doorframe, eyes on the sidewalk like a lighthouse that had traded light for attention. Outside, a handful of people gathered with signs that read transparency now and no grifters in our backyard. One held a phone up like a badge. We're live, he announced to an audience that existed elsewhere. Inside, Tasha taped down a power cord and then taped it again, just in case. Ray stood awkwardly by the coffee urn in a clean shirt that fit him like a dare. You're allowed to be here, Crystal told him. You work here, he nodded. as if a piece of paper had changed hands. At 7, Michael stepped up to the mic that wasn't a mic, a portable speaker on a chair, a wire taped like a vein across the floor. "We're grateful you're here," he said, and it didn't sound like a line. He spoke briefly and without adjectives. How many showers in a week? How many IDs? How many blood pressures caught and sent to clinics before numbers turned into strokes? He acknowledged the video without naming it. "If you have questions about where money goes, ask," he said. "We will show you receipts. Tonight is not about convincing you with spin. It's about telling the truth with soup and with stories." He looked at Emily. She looked at her legal pad. Crystal mouthed, "Describe." Emily stepped forward, palms damp enough to grip paper. Words arrange themselves differently when they know they'll have to cross a room. The lines she'd written felt suddenly too thin. She set the pad down. "My name is Emily," she said. She didn't add the nickname. It arrived on its own, a murmur that skimmed and then sank. "I spend mornings writing names on stickers," she said. "Dolores, Luis, James. Sometimes writing the name is the first time it's been seen in a day." She attempted a smile that wasn't technique. "I learned to find socks with grips. That sounds small until you've been to a shelter shower." A chuckle rolled and bumped against someone's throat. She kept going. "On Monday, we took 6 people to the DMV," she said. "We left with for temporary IDs. 2 will need more paperwork, which we'll gather, because the state loves forms more than it loves people. On Wednesday, a man's blood pressure scared me and a nurse got him to a hospital before the fear turned into a headline. Every day, a kid locks a bag, showers, and finds the bag where they left it." A man in the back raised his phone and called out, "How much of tonight goes to admin?" Someone else added, "What's your salary?" Crystal started to move. Emily lifted a hand slightly to say it's okay and did not reach for her legal pad. "I'm paid hourly," she said. "Part-time. My rent still scares me. The rest of it, we can show you line by line how many socks, how many counseling sessions, how much bleach." She took a breath before the word audits. "We're inviting an independent audit because we should have one anyway. But the fastest answer is this room. You can ask anyone here what they've done this week. It's not glamorous. It's paperwork and towels and tea." A woman near the soup table said, "My brother needed that tea," and didn't elaborate. Something softened along the ceiling. Emily pointed to the map. "This was made by a young person who thinks they can't draw," she said. "They drew a shoe and a cat and a curb and a street. I think they drew a way home." Outside, a chant rose, "Show us the money." Inside, Tasha turned the music up a notch, not to drown it out, but to make the room choose itself. A man pushed in through the door and raised his phone chest high. "Tell us about the video," he said, staring at the screen instead of her face. Deshawn took 2 steps sideways, and the man found himself turned very gently back toward the night, like someone redirected by a tide. "Transparency," he called, backing out. "If you have nothing to hide." "We have nothing to hide," Crystal said, almost cheerfully. "We also have nothing to prove to your live stream." Michael came back to the mic. "We could talk numbers all night," he said, and people made sounds that meant please don't. Instead, "We're going to pass soup." He lifted a ladle. "And after that, if anyone wants to speak, the mic is a piece of plastic and a willingness to be specific." The line for soup formed, polite as lines go. Emily carried stacks of bowls and thought, absurdly, of the cafe, of Tampers and Crema and how hands learn the weight of a full cup. She avoided the windows because eyes pressed to glass can derail a sentence you're holding in your head. Sam wasn't there. The room made a Sam-shaped absence in her chest. She ladled lentils for Ray, who said, "Never thought I'd be somewhere with soup and a microphone that wasn't court." She laughed harder than the joke deserved. Then the door opened, and Sam slid in, hood up as if the night might try to steal hair. They stood near the wall for a full minute, scanning the crowd, assessing exits. They saw the map and stepped closer, fingers hovering a fraction above their own lines. Emily caught Crystal's eye. "Don't push," Crystal's look said. Let gravity. When the soup bowls emptied and people began to settle again, Michael asked, anyone? He didn't look at Emily. He didn't have to. A beat stretched. Then Ray lifted his hand like a kid in class and shuffled forward. He didn't take the mic. He stood near it. I'm Ray, he said. I'm good at sweeping. I'm learning to be on time. A laugh, small and kind. People say men like me make neighborhoods worse. But when I sleep inside on a bed, I don't freeze and I don't scare nobody. When I'm warm, I can show up to a job. He gestured toward Emily, without naming her. Someone wrote my name like it wasn't a mistake. That helps. He stepped back, surprised he'd said that many words. A woman in a professional coat followed. My son, she said simply, and then stopped, emotion knocking at the door of the sentence. He wouldn't go to a shelter. He went here during the day because he could leave. They didn't trap him with kindness to get photos. They gave him toothpaste and a person who remembered him. He answered when I texted last week. He hadn't in 2 months. The room held that. Then, before Emily could think to hope, Sam moved. They had ditched the hood somewhere between the door and the wall. Their hair curled where it had dried crooked. They stood awkwardly near the mic like a person who had always avoided microphones and just found out they would need one. I'm Sam, they said, chin out as if swinging first. With an I don't like talking. They glanced toward the door, toward the map. They got a sign in there says take 2. No questions. That sign is for me. A ripple of recognition passed through the room, people remembering hunger in whatever form they had known it. I thought this place was fake, Sam said. I thought it was going to be like school where they say they got rules for safety, and then kids take your stuff and the rules are for you when you complain. I put my bag outside the shower and it was there when I came out. Someone wrote my name on a lock. I hadn't seen my name in a long time unless it was on a report. Their throat worked around a laugh. I'm trying for the GED. We're going to fail practice tests with dignity. The room laughed in the way rooms do when they're grateful for a line that holds the sadness and the hope at once. In the video, Sam added, because the room had been waiting for it. Everyone says it's true. It's not. Also, I don't care if rich people argue with each other about grants. I care that I can get a shower. I care that someone knows my name. I care that my bag is still there. If you care about that stuff, too, then put money in the envelope. Or bring socks. Or shut up. They blinked, half apologetic. Sorry. I don't know how to do this. You're doing fine, Deshawn said from the door, and it felt like the floor itself agreed. Silence followed, the kind that means the room has exhaled at the same time. Then a sound of chairs shifting, of hands finding pens. Someone in the back said, I'll match up to 5,000, and the room rustled. Michael looked like someone had set down something heavy for him without being asked. A woman who had come prepared to be skeptical approached the donation table and said, Do you take checks? She said, checks like apology? Tasha said, We take duct tape too. And the woman dug into her bag and produced a roll. Outside, the chanting thinned. The blogger posted a clip. They're hiding. They threw me out. Why won't they answer questions? The comments were familiar. Inside, people wrote numbers, email addresses, notes that said things like I can drive to appointments and I can teach a resume workshop and sorry I shared that video. After, when the room was crumbs and rinse water and a pile of envelopes that looked both promising and insufficient, Emily leaned against the wall near the map and let her nerves catch up. Her hands buzzed as if she'd gripped a subway pole too tightly for too long. You didn't pass out, Michael said, eyebrows up in a way that meant proud. I almost did when Sam said shut up, she admitted. Then I wanted to cheer. Crystal counted the envelopes by feel. Enough to plug holes and buy socks, she said. We live to mop another day. Ray carried a stack of chairs that looked heavy, moved like they were made of air. You sounded like you wrote it, he told Emily. I didn't, she said. I just told it. He nodded. That's how you write the things that matter. On the way out, Deshawn paused at the door and listened the way he listened, scanning for trouble. We'll have more of them next time, he said. Meaning protesters, meaning cameras. But we'll have more of us too. As Emily stepped onto the sidewalk, her phone buzzed. The channel with the knife title had posted a teaser. Part 2 drops tomorrow. The thumbnail showed the day center's door, ominous with contrast. She felt the old lurch in her stomach, and then felt something sturdier underneath Itzam's voice. Raised shrug. Dolores's cane tapping a rhythm that had been taught to her children and their children. She walked to the train with the legal pad under her arm, the map still taped to the wall behind her like a promise. The city hummed with the late-hour life of bodegas and laundromats and people who didn't want to go home yet. In the glass of a darkened storefront, she saw her reflection, tired, necessary. Tomorrow would arrive with its fluorescent light and floor cleaner and the phone that wouldn't stop. She would put buckets under what she couldn't fix and mop, and somewhere, someone would write their name and see it in someone else's hand, and it would matter. Part 2 of the video dropped at 7:01 a.m., timed like a commute, thumbnails in black and red, captions that sounded like sirens. The voice-over said, "Whistleblower again," said "mismanaged again," said "staged again." It panned across the day center's door and a blurred face and a chart with arrows that always pointed down, like gravity had a moral argument. The comments landed on the center's page before Emily finished tying her boots. She reached the basement to find Crystal already triaging a flood of emails. "We've got 3 new volunteers," Crystal said, tapping her screen, "and 14 nasties. Net gain, if you're a pessimist who knows math." Deshawn had moved his chair closer to the door. To people with phones loitered across the sidewalk, narrating the weather like it was breaking news. Someone had slid a flyer under the door in the night, transparency now in a font that wanted to make threats sound like requests. "Today we do oatmeal, we do showers, we do art night," Crystal said. "We can't argue with people glued to their screens, but we can outlast them." By mid-morning, the room had done what it always did, breathed. The nurse's cuff hissed, the lawyer's sneakers squeaked, the coffee made its old smell brave. Emily wrote names until her hand cramped. James, with an M that looked like mountains. Dolores, whose cane was a metronome. Louise, holding his temporary ID like paper could be armor. At noon, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "I believe you. Be careful." The words made a soft place in her chest and another that hurt. Around 2, a man stuck his head in the door, raised his phone, and asked, "Why won't you answer questions?" without listening for the answer. Deshawn moved him out with the patience he saved for people who might one day come back without the performance. In the lull before art night, Sam arrived and hovered near the intake table with a battered sketchbook tucked under their arm like contraband. "I drew something," they said, pretending to be bored. "It's dumb." Emily washed her hands, dried them on her jeans, and held out her palm. "Let me see dumb." The drawing showed a door. Not a fancy door, no carved wood. No brass but a metal one with a push bar and a small square window. The window had a shade half drawn. Above the door, in block letters, "Exit," down the corridor, a suggestion of other doors, other signs. "I like your exits," Emily said. Sam glanced at the floor. "I figure if you can't find one, you draw one," they said, as if it were obvious. They helped Tasha tape butcher paper to tables. Ray adjusted a fan that clicked once every rotation, a sound he dampened with a folded napkin. By 5, Crystal had coaxed a dozen markers and a jar of brushes out of the supply closet and 3 dozen people out of the weather. The room looked like something you could live inside for a while without being asked to justify it. Outside, the live streamers multiplied into a handful. One had a sign with Emily's nickname in 12-point moral clarity. "They're doing workshops," he announced to his phone, because nothing says emergency like finger painting. He laughed the way people laugh when they want company. Inside, Tasha set a rule: draw without apologizing. Dolores drew her block from memory, adding a stoop and a fire hydrant and a cat. Ray drew a broom that looked like a comet. Sam drew the door again, smaller this time, as if testing the scale. Emily drew a hand. It looked like a child's hand until she shaded the knuckles, and then it looked like her mother's. The first hint was a smell that didn't fit sharp and sweet at once, the way plastic is sweet when it remembers chemicals. Then came a sound that made everyone's shoulders jerk, the pop of glass somewhere not far but not here. Smoke crawled under the door as if it had a map. Crystal was on her feet before the alarm. Old, wheezy, late found its voice. "Everybody out," she said, calm like a recipe. "Leave it all, walk. Don't grab. Deshaun, clear the hall. Tasha, bathrooms. Emily, head count." The room obeyed her tone more than her words. People moved without the small negotiations that usually slowed them. The door opened to a hallway that was already gathering smoke in the corners like bad weather. Deshaun made himself into a corridor, his shoulders suddenly as wide as the city. He guided people past panic with a phrase that belonged on a sign. "You're doing fine." Emily counted in twos and then again. Names were easier than numbers. Dolores, Louise, the nurse, the lawyer. "Ray, where's Sam?" she asked the air, then louder, a question that wasn't a question. The bathroom door at the far end of the hall was shut, light on behind it. Tasha hammered it with the heel of her hand. "Anyone in there?" No answer. The alarm got its act together and began to wail. "I've got the front," Deshaun called, shepherding a final straggler through the door to the street. "I've got the back," Crystal answered, already moving toward a side exit none of the cameras outside could see. Smoke thickened. Emily pulled her sleeve over her mouth. She thought of drills in school, how children were walked through catastrophe with crayons. She thought of the sketch of a door with exit above it and of the small square window. She ran. "Sam," she shouted, the name tearing in the alarm's pitch. She banged on the bathroom door and found it unlocked. Inside, steam mixed with smoke into a confusion that made her eyes smart. A shape moved, then stumbled. Sam's hood was up, their face in outline. "I couldn't find," they started, coughing. Emily grabbed their wrist, then their elbow. "You don't tug hard on people who've been yanked their whole lives." "Down," she said, and made herself a path low along the sink row. The floor was gritty with something that had been a mop bucket yesterday. Her lungs burned as if they had opinions. A hallway that had been simple when it was quiet became a maze when it shouted. The wrong door stuck. The right door opened onto the back steps and a slice of evening that looked like water. They spilled into it, both of them coughing like language had been replaced by smoke. The air outside was so cold it felt clean. Sirens rose, recognizable and close now. Not just the city's background song, but the kind that came when you dialed and someone dialed back. An engine turned the corner in a blast of red and chrome and purpose. A firefighter shouldered past with a hose as if it were a stubborn animal. Water hit the doorway in a sheet that turned the smoke into a wall. Emily and Sam coughed themselves into oxygen. The EMTs made a triage of the sidewalk, pragmatic and gentle. Someone pressed an oxygen mask to Sam's face and then one to Emily's. The world narrowed to rubber and air and the shock of being let back in. Tasha appeared and wrapped a foil blanket around both of them like a piece of magic that crinkled. Michael materialized with a face like someone trying not to swear in a church. "You okay?" he asked, the words a check more than a question. Emily nodded because it was easier than describing breathing. Ray stood a few feet away, scarf bright against smoke, eyes wet in a way that made him look younger. "You did good," he said, which was the only grade anyone wanted. Out front, where the lift streamers were, the glass in the door had shattered inward. A donation bin smoldered, papers reduced to black curls that lifted and fell. Later, someone would say they'd seen a hand throw something at the door, a bottle, a bright thing. Later the firefighters would use words like accelerant and deliberate. Later the police would take notes, and the insurance adjuster would frown and the landlord would say it was a lot for a church. But tonight the thing that existed was water running along the curb, and the steam that rose from it and the sound of people checking if their people were their people. A woman from the building next door put her arm around Dolores, who pretended not to need it. Louis held his ID under his shirt like it might drown. The nurse counted her bag's contents and came up one stethoscope short and shrugged as if she'd expected the cost. Deshaun moved through the crowd counting with his eyes, a ledger that never took lunch. Somewhere in the mess, someone lifted a phone. For once, the frame held a truth that didn't need cutting. Emily half carrying, half dragging Sam through the back door. The foil blanket flashing like a fish, the oxygen mask. The look on a face that isn't performance, because performance requires breath. The clip traveled the way things travel now, sideways and fast, hopping from one hand to another. A neighbor posted it with a caption that didn't try to make it into a lesson. They pulled that kid out. I saw. The live streamers at the front tried to keep their narrative. One cast himself as the true witness, another speculated about insurance. But the angle shifted when the glow of sirens turned faces human instead of archetypes. Comments flickered. A woman wrote, "I volunteer there. Stop." A man wrote, "I used to sleep under the BQE. A bed saves lives." Someone else typed, "Sorry I shared that thing. Delete." Others didn't. The internet does not apologize. People do. It was enough. When the worst of the smoke had been hammered into submission, the fire captain came over with a jaw like a brick and a softness in his eyes you only saw if you were looking. "Looks like someone tossed something through the glass," he said. "We'll have inspectors in the morning." He nodded toward Michael. "You got somewhere to bring your folks tonight." "We'll figure it out," Michael said, which was another way to say yes if you squinted. He had already texted a pastor in Crown Heights, a director in Sunset Park. The network made itself visible under pressure like veins under thin skin. Sam tugged the mask down. "My drawing," they said, breathless, then coughed. "The map." "We'll make another," Emily said, her own throat scraping. She didn't look back at the door. If the map burned, it burned. They could draw exits in triplicate. Crystal moved through the crowd like a general and a grandmother. "Hands," she said, handing out wipes. "If you're shaking, that's your body telling you you're alive. Good news." She pointed at volunteers. "Inventory what's not wet. We'll make coffee somewhere that's not here. Michael, call the church about the rec room. Deshaun, grab cones. We're going to stage a hallway in the parking lot." Ray draped his scarf around Emily's shoulders as if she were a lamppost that might catch cold. "You're allowed to sit," he said. "If I sit, I won't get up," she said, and he nodded because he knew the geometry of fatigue. Reporters arrived when the worst was over, lugging tripods and words like alleged. One of them aimed a mic at Emily and asked, "Is it true you refused food too?" and then looked past the question at her soot-streaked face and stopped. "What happened?" he asked instead. She told him without making it a speech. Smoke, door, a kid, a hallway, the air. Across the street, beneath the basketball hoop with the net half missing, Crystal assembled people into lines the way she always did. Intake, tea, blankets. Someone plugged a coffee pot into an outlet borrowed from the bodega. Steam rose again, stubborn. It tasted like victory even if they'd have called it something else. Near midnight, after the hoses had been rolled and the sidewalk returned to its unglamorous job of holding weight, Michael stood with Emily at the curb. The center's door was boarded for the night, the tape across it both a wound and a promise. Sirens receded into the city's larger hum. "I'm sorry," he said, and she didn't ask what for. Leaders apologize for what the world does, because they understand what it asks. "It could have been worse," she said, which was true and also not. Her hair smelled like someone else's fire. Her chest felt like she'd swallowed a small sun. He looked at his phone, at 100 messages. "The clip of you and Sam is everywhere," he said. "I didn't post it, a neighbor did. People are seeing." "Seeing isn't the same as staying," she said, because she'd learned to treat attention as weather. "Sometimes it's the first step," he said. She looked at the wet chalk line where the water had made a border and at the people she knew by name standing on the other side of it, steaming gently. She thought of Sam's door, all exit and no entrance. She thought of maps that told you the truth and of flames that did too. "Tomorrow," she said. Tomorrow, he echoed. They would find a temporary room. They would borrow tables. They would reinvent towels. They would write names in bolder letters and buy more locks. The city would see and forget and remember and forget again. But something had burned that wasn't just paper, a layer between someone's doubt and someone else's life. The smoke lifted in the black cold, a seam that opened and then closed. Somewhere deep in the grid, a door swung on its hinge and stayed. By morning, the sidewalk in front of the center was the kind of quiet that follows a storm. The door was boarded, tape angled across it like a pause button. Down the block, a bodega owner had left an extension cord coiled like a lifeline. Crystal had moved the operation to a borrowed rec room in Crown Heights by 8 a.m. Plastic tables, borrowed coffee pots, a sign printed at a copy shop at 6 that said second chance temporary. We're not closed, she told anyone who asked. We're moved. People found them the way water finds a low place. Dolores walked in wielding her cane like a flag and declared, "Smells like bug spray," before sitting and accepting tea. Luis arrived with his temporary ID laminated because he was taking no chances. Ray came in clean shirt again, hair damp, looking like someone who had decided to keep deciding. Sam slid a drawing onto the table, a door again, the same push bar, the window shaded halfway. This time, above the door, exit was crossed out. They had written open. Mid-morning, the fire inspector came by the rec room, filled out the part of a form that could be filled out off-site, and said the word, arson. The captain from the night before called Michael, accelerant confirmed, entry forced with a bottle. The phrase targeted incident hung in the air with the smell of coffee. Michael hung up and said, "We'll upgrade doors. We'll upgrade cameras. We won't upgrade fear." By noon, the clip of Emily pulling Sam through the back door had looped through morning shows and mid-tier news sites and into group chats that had previously used her nickname as a punchline. The neighbor's caption traveled with it. "They pulled that kid out. I saw." A talk radio host who had enjoyed saying grift the day before said courage on air and sounded surprised to hear himself. Michael set a folder on the table that was not meant for tea. "Our audit," he said. Quick look, with a deep one to follow. He had called a pro bono team at midnight, and they had turned the city's sleeplessness into a 12-page document by dawn. Line items bleach, bus cards, blood pressure cuff sat next to charts with arrows that did not argue with gravity, but showed where the money went when it sank into need. He stepped in front of a local news camera and held it up. "We will run leaner and cleaner than your skepticism," he said. "We invite scrutiny. We just don't invite cruelty into rooms where people are trying to stay dry." In the afternoon, a reporter named Emmy I parked small notebook, eyes like someone who owed truth more than click sat on a folding chair and flipped through printouts. She had been following the channel with the knife font for months. "They're not journalists," she said matter-of-factly to Michael and Crystal in a corner that smelled like pine sol. "They're a revenue engine. Rage in, add dollars out." She spread out 3 emails across the table, letting the paper weight the words. The emails showed a freelance producer pitching exposes about nonprofits to potential sponsors, amplification packages, rates for investigative content, add-ons for targeted distribution. A fourth was an invoice, paid from a Gamel associated with a man whose name Emily recognized only when I said it aloud. Andrew Keene, the cafe's district supervisor. The one who had called HR the day the video first blew up and had sent a box with her apron home. The one with eyelashes that fluttered when he was uncomfortable. "He sent money to the channel 3 days after you were placed on leave." I said, tapping the date. Subject line, content boost. Michael's jaw worked. Crystal didn't swear, mostly because she had run out of new ones. Emily stood next to the table and felt something inside her slide into placid, not joy, not relief exactly, but a click of the puzzle that made the picture legible. "It's not illegal to be an unkind man," I said, tone even, "and it's not illegal to be a bad producer. But this daisy chain of content and cash explains that sudden interest in your small life." She looked at Emily, I'm running the story tonight. I wanted you to know, before you were the last to hear again. The cafe chain, reached by a different reporter, rushed out a statement by late afternoon. We have parted ways with the district supervisor. We do not condone the targeting of individuals. We regret any role we played in amplifying misinformation. It was corporate and late, but it traveled. The channel posted a defensive video with a title that tried to sound contrite without losing momentum. Comments under the apology were a war. Under the clip of Emily and Sam, they were something else. I was wrong. Someone wrote, plain and expensive, I'm sorry. The community board chair emailed Michael to say item 3 was back on the agenda next month with a note about regrettable timing. We'll bring chairs, Crystal said. And it was a joke and a plan. Donations returned in the same way panic had arrived, in clumps and jumps. A foundation that had paused sent a wire pending the full audit. A coffee shop in Bed-Stuy emailed to say they were doing a day where every muffin sold would send socks, a phrase that made Emily laugh out loud. Ray, overhearing, said, full circle, and held his hands up like a hoop for her to walk through. She did. At 2, Ray put on a borrowed collared shirt and went 2 buildings for an interview. He came back at 4 carrying a piece of paper that was not an ID and not a ticket, but something in between. They want me next Tuesday at 7, he said, dazed. They said if I'm on time, they'll keep me on for the week. Dolores, pretending not to be moved, tapped her cane 3 times in what might have been applause if she were less herself. Sam took the GED practice test on a laptop that had seen too many hands and too many captchas. Emily sat next to them and did not correct answers. When Sam swore under their breath, Emily said, dignity, and Sam said, shut up, and they both smiled without looking. By late day, news vans idled outside the burnt doorway on 11th and filmed plywood like it had quotes. May's article went live at 5 with a headline that didn't crow. How a viral channel and a corporate supervisor built a smear. Screenshots, timelines, quotes from an ethics professor who said ads and outrage are a bad mix when you point them at people's lives. A sidebar linked to the audit. The last line quoted Crystal, we don't have time to be perfect, we have to be useful. Messages began to pile into the center's inbox like apologies had learned to multiply. I shared that video. I'm sorry. Do you still need volunteers on Tuesdays? Another. I built websites. Your donation page is bad. Can I fix it? Another. My mom used your showers. Tell her the soup made with too much cumin was still good. Emily read until the blur made the words look like waves, and then put the laptop away and made tea for someone who had not slept and could not say why. In the evening, an officer stopped by the rec room to say they had identified a person of interest in the fire, a man seen on a security camera 2 blocks away buying lighter fluid and walking toward 11th. He wore a hoodie and anger like a uniform, not one of the live streamers. Not a name anyone recognized, not a mastermind. Just a man who had pulled a string on a room full of paper. We'll keep you posted, the officer said. We'll talk cameras and doors once your head stops spinning. It won't, Crystal said, then softened, but we'll talk doors anyway. The next morning, Emily walked past the center to look at the board over the broken glass. Some ineptly Tasha had taped a piece of paper to the plywood in fat marker. We're next door. Sorry about the smell. We're fine. Someone else had stuck a roll of duct tape on a nail like an offering. A man in a suit stood nearby with a paper cup and a look that could have been curiosity or guilt. I saw you on TV, he said, wincing at the sentence. I said things online last week I wouldn't say to my mother. He handed Emily a check folded in half. This doesn't undo it, he said, but maybe it buys socks. Thank you, she said, and meant it not only for the paper but for the sentence. At the rec room, Michael set a stack of printed audits on a table like a prop and then didn't point to them once. He stood instead with his sleeves rolled and poured coffee into a line of chipped mugs. He looked across the room and caught Emily's eye. The look didn't say vindicated. It said still here. Sam arrived half an hour late, which for Sam was early. They slid into a chair, opened the laptop again, and then looked at Emily. I watched that reporter's piece, they said. They made the bad guy look boring. That's good reporting, Emily said. If you make the villain interesting, they get fans. Sam clicked begin. When I pass, they said, as if the word were a plank they were stepping on too. I want to draw a bigger map. We'll need more tape, Emily said. In the afternoon, a city council member stopped by with staff in tow and said all the things they say after fires when cameras are rolling. After the cameras left, she stayed 30 seconds longer than her staff needed her to and asked, "What do you actually need?" Crystal handed her a list with the line items no one campaigns on: plungeable toilets, bulk socks, 2 hours of a plumber's time. The staffer looked surprised. "We can do that," he said, like goodness had been made practical. At closing, Michael gathered the team. "Donations are back to baseline," he said. "Some beyond. Audit's been read 50,000 times, which is 50,000 more times than audits usually get read." The channels posted a clarification. The cafe chain wants to meet to talk about job placements and probably to salve their conscience. The board put us back on the agenda. We have a temporary lease on a space to blocks over starting Monday. It has bad fluorescent lights and a back door that we'll reinforce. He turned to Emily. "I know this doesn't erase anything," he said, "but you should hear the word out loud. Vindicated." She shook her head, not to reject it, but to set it down. "It doesn't change what happened," she said, "but it changes what we can do next." "Exactly," Crystal said, "and what we can do next is buy socks." They laughed because most roads led there. On her way home, Emily stopped at the cafe where she'd worked. The impulse sudden and not strategic. The host knew, or just new to her shifted weight when he recognized her face and couldn't decide which version he knew. The manager came out, the one whose eyelashes had fluttered, and didn't look her in the eye. "I read the piece," he said, without preamble. I'm out." He gestured to mean the company, the role, the whatever. "It got away from me." "From you?" she asked, surprised to hear him name himself as the center of a thing he'd pretended was policy. He swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like a person at least, if not a full confession. She nodded once and left because there was no speech there that would fix time. Outside, the late light did that city trick again, turning faces briefly beautiful. She bought 2 muffins with cash and brought them to the rec room. She wrote "Take 2, no questions," in bigger letters and taped the sign down even harder. Her mother texted, "You look strong in that clip." She replied, "I look dirty." Her mother wrote back, "Strong and dirty can be the same." That night, when the map was rolled and the tables stacked, she sat on the stoop under her window with Ray. He showed her the text he'd received. "See you Tuesday 6:55. He grinned in a way that made the years fall off. "I can be early," he said, as if it were a superpower. "You can," she said, and believed it. The city kept moving around them, brilliant and indifferent, forgiving and not. The internet had not learned to apologize, but enough people had. The door on 11th would be replaced with a stronger door. The new space would smell like somebody else's decisions until they made it theirs. The board would gavel again, and voices would rise, and Dolores would arrive early with her cane-like punctuation. For now, the night was cold and ordinary. Emily looked up at her window, at the cactus that had somehow put out a second pale bud. She thought of the word vindicated and felt it land not like a trophy, but like a tool. Tomorrow there would be paperwork and tea and a nurse swearing softly at a blood pressure cuff. Tomorrow she would write names in large letters, her handwriting big enough that someone could see themselves in it. Tomorrow she would show up, and someone else would too, and that was how cities were built back from ash. One person at a time, staying. By the time the next community board meeting rolled around, the new temporary space smelled like fresh paint and borrowed purpose. The bad fluorescent lights hummed, the coffee pot hissed. The sign on the door said "Second Chance" in block letters and, underneath, "Open even when we move." Emily stood at the long table, bundling donation envelopes with a rubber band that fought back. Sam tacked their newest drawing to the wall and their door, this one with both exit and enter written above it, then crossed out, replaced simply with here. You ready? Crystal asked, easing into the chair across from her and tying her hair into a knot that meant entrance. Shoes laced, arguments in your pocket. I'll describe, Emily said, because she'd learned the word was enough. Dolores arrived early to the board meeting, of course, cane planted like a stake. The cafeteria's beige cinder block walls looked softer than last time, or be it was the way the neighborhood had air of vettingry and hopeful in equal measure. People who had changed their minds and people determined not to. Michael carried the audit in a manila folder he barely touched. Deshawn scanned the room and found the exits, because that was what he did now by reflex. Ray sat to Rose's back, shirt collar crisp. Sam stood near the back with their hood down and their jaw set. The chair banged the gavel and read the agenda. Item 3. Proposed conversion of 118 Kent Avenue to overnight shelter. The room tightened. A man in a Patagonia vest stood. It's too close to the school, he said. Again, as if he were recording the neighborhood couldn't figure out how to stop property values. A woman with a baby at her chest spoke, less angry than afraid. Is there security? Who runs it? What happens when somebody uses? The chair nodded at Michael, who kept his title out of his mouth and spoke in nouns. Cots, staff, case managers, partnerships with clinics, lights, locks, people. We don't run from the things that scare you. We manage them so they don't have to live on your stoops. Dolores stood without waiting for acknowledgement. Talk loud, so even the people hiding behind their phones can hear you, she said to the room, not kindly and not cruelly. She tapped her cane once. Beds make neighborhoods safer. Doors with locks make people better neighbors. We're not asking for your compassion. We're telling you what keeps you from stepping over somebody on your way to Pilates. A laugh broke, quick and real. The temperature shifted a degree. Emily stood when the chair's eyes landed on her. My name is Emily, she said. She did not add the nickname. I write names on stickers. I walk people to the DMV. I pull kids through doors when smoke crawls under them. A ripple of acknowledgement moved like a small wave across the rows. We're not perfect. We're useful. We're asking for a building where usefulness can go on at night. The man in the vest started to stand again, then sat. The board member with a pen behind his ear said, We've reviewed the audit. The chair said, We've received an unusual volume of community comments in favor. The woman with the baby said, If this is run like your day center, I vote yes, even if I don't get a vote. Someone in the backseaming who had held a sign outside the fundraiser raised a hand and said, haltingly, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Votes clacked like dominoes. The motion passed. Applause bent the room for a moment into something closer to itself. Outside, the night breathed in and out, unchanged and changed. Work began, because it had to. The warehouse at 118 Kent slowly shed its darkness. Painters covered profanity with primer, and then with eggshell. Metal beds arrived like letters in a new alphabet, each with a mattress, each with a blanket folded at the foot. A maintenance crew reinforced the doors. Cameras went up, angled to see without intruding. A bulletin board held schedules, clinic hours, the two words that held the room together. Be kind. On the first evening, there was no ribbon cutting, no speeches. A line formed just before 8 p.m. Men with duffel bags, women with backpacks, a teenager with nothing but a jacket zipped to the chin. Intake went the way intake goes when you do it 1,000 times. Names, birth dates, a question about allergies, a note about medication. Emily wore a lanyard that said nights for the first time and watched the beds fill one by one, like lights flicking on across a block. Ray stood near the back with a broom in his hand, not because he had to, but because it calmed him. On time, he murmured, checking his watch the way a person checks a compass. He had started his building's job 2 days early, then earlier than that, until he was simply a man who arrived when he said he would. In his pocket lay a key to a room he could lock, paper-thin walls and a window that stuck but was his. I can be early, he had said. He was, and the world had made a small space for it. Luis came by the next morning with his permanent ID, the plastic shining as if it were something more than plastic. They spelled it right, he said, and Crystal hugged him because that fact was a miracle. Sam took their GED and passed the language section, then the science, then failed the math with a score that could be retaken, which they did. When the passing letter came, they read it twice and then just carried it around, folded and unfolded until it softened at the creases. They started stopping by the shelters, art night, to teach other people how to draw doors with the line of the push bar just so. You draw your here, they told a woman who said she hadn't drawn since grade school. We'll help you tape it up. The cafe in Bed-Stuy did a muffins for Socks Day. The sign in the window was cheeky and unashamed. Eat a muffin, warm a pair of feet. They delivered 3 bins of thick wool ones with grips. Emily and Tasha put up the old sign in their new room. Take 2. No questions. In letters big enough that even the shyest glance could read it. The channel that had tried to make a career out of outrage posted a 3rd video with a subdued title and the word clarification buried in the thumbnail. Fewer people clicked. The comment with the most likes said, "We're done here." May's follow-up on local TV showed the first night's beds filling without faces, just hands on blankets, a pair of boots lined up neatly under a cot, a case manager laughing not at someone but near them. The anchor read the closing line without drama. The shelter will add 60 beds to a neighborhood that needed them. On a Wednesday afternoon, the New Day Center 12 blocks over, fluorescent lights replaced by warm lamps paid for by a donor who wanted to be off the website hung a mural on the back wall. It was Sam's map made bigger. Lines painted by many hands, a street, a cat, a shoe, a door with no words above it. People pointed to corners like tourists in their own city. Crystal stood back and pretended not to wipe her eyes. Deshawn touched the door in the painting like it might open if you pushed hard enough. Emily's mother came to visit in March, a coat not warm enough for the wind, a Midwestern patience meeting a New York pace. She followed Emily through the room with a face that tried to memorize everything. "It smells like bleach," she said, then added, "and coffee." She watched Emily print names in big letters and pour tea without spilling and help a woman fill out a form without correcting every misspelling out loud. "In the subway back to Brooklyn," she said, "I thought strong and dirty couldn't go together. I was wrong." Emily laughed and leaned her head on her mother's shoulder for 3 stops, then 4. At 118 Kent, a chalkboard by the door read, "Tonight's beds, 60, available, 2. By midnight it read 0. Then, sometimes, someone left to walk a loop around the block and returned when the loop had done its job. And there was one again. A nurse with a tired ponytail handed out pills with unglamorous precision. A volunteer lawyer explained for the 8th time that night what a warrant was and how to attend to it without falling apart. A man cried quietly under a blanket and stopped, not because he was finished, but because sleep put a hand on his shoulder and said now. Michael kept his desk messy on purpose, papers hatching their way into stacks, because he liked what the mess declared. Work ongoing. He slept less than he admitted, but his eyes were softer when he looked at the room. He had learned another skill, to leave it and let it run without him. Crystal kept her pen, her clipboard, her rules that kept dignity safe. She still interrupted donors just before they suggested a selfie and said, "We can email you a letter," with a smile that had teeth. She wrote wins on the whiteboard each night like an incantation. James meds picked up, Ray shift 3/5 early, Sam passed math, loss, mop broke. She drew a crown on wins and a frown on loss and added, under both, by socks. One evening in early spring, the cactus on Emily's windowsill did the thing she hadn't known to expect. It bloomed, not with drama, but with a pale flower that looked like a small flag in fog. She laughed out loud and sent a photo to Crystal, who wrote back, "Remember to water the person who waters the plant." Emily closed her eyes and slept hard for 9 hours. So deep she didn't hear the radiator start up, so deep she didn't dream. At the shelter, The night staff learned their regulars by shoes and coughs more than by names, because names came after trust. The building's back door enforced, rehinged into the alley where trucks unloaded and kids on scooters clattered past in daylight. At midnight, someone knocked and said, "Is this the place?" And the intake worker said, "Yes," and wrote a name in letters big enough to be read by a person holding themselves together with string. The community board chair visited quietly one night and stood in the doorway and nodded without taking notes. The man in the vest walked past once and didn't cross the street. He kept walking and kept not looking like a person practicing not being afraid. The woman with the baby came by during the day with a box of diapers and no speech. Emily met Ray on the stoop under her window in the blue hour when the city is both loud and gentle. He held up a key and a stub of a paycheck, and his grin had a new angle to it, pride without apology. "They added me to the schedule regular," he said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays, then more if I don't mess up. I can be early both days." "You can," she said. "You are, and Sam," he said, "the way a person shares good gossip that isn't gossip. Sam's talking about community college. They're drawing a bigger map," she said. He nodded. "We all are," he said. On a Friday night, Emily walked through the shelter's dorm quietly, not to inspect, but to learn the way the room breathed. Snoring layered with murmurs layered with the hum of a machine that helped a man breathe. A case manager whispered to a woman at the end of a row about a plan for Monday. Ray, off shift, dropped by to fix a door that stuck because he couldn't knot. In the lobby, Sam's mural printed from the painting and mounted on foam board sat above the check-in desk like a reminder and a dare. Here, it implied. Not exit, not enter. Here. When Emily left at dawn, the sky over the river was the color of primer, ready for paint. She stood on the sidewalk, coffee in hand, and let the air sting her lungs. The city was brilliant and indifferent and forgiven as much as it could be. She thought about the first sandwich, about the video that had tried to make her into a headline, about a door opening into smoke, and about the way a room changes when you write someone's name in your own hand. She thought about the word vindicated and how it had turned out not to be a finish line but a tool. On her phone, a notification blinked from someone she didn't know. "My sister sleeps there now." "Thank you." Beneath it, another, "I'd like to volunteer on Tuesdays. Do you still need socks?" She typed yes and remembered to drink her coffee before it cooled. Back at her window, the cactus flower had opened a degree more, shameless in its smallness. She reached up and touched the sill, then picked up a marker and wrote a note on a sticky for the white board. Describe. Don't defend. Then she wrote the word that would be the first thing she put on every line for as long as she worked in rooms like this one. Names. On Monday, she would bring Sam's bigger map to the new center, tape it to the wall with Tasha's overkill, and stand back while people pointed and said, "That's my block," and "That's my cat," and sometimes, "That's my door." The shelter would add 60 beds again the next night and the next. They would put buckets under what they couldn't fix, and they would mop. The light beneath the skyline would be small and not enough and also enough. And when someone asked where to begin, she would hand them a Sharpie and a sticker and point to the line where a name goes.